Welcome to another chilling mystery in the world of Dr. Gideon Fell, the Halloween guest. A locked room, a strangled scholar, and a vanished trunk. Can logic expose the truth behind an impossible crime? Where are you listening from tonight? Tell us in the comments below. The mist that October had bred now clung thick about the little town of Mapledon, muffling lamps and swallowing the crunch of boots along cobbles. It was on such a night, a week before All Hallows Eve, that the impossible happened at the Maple Inn. At 10:30, Miss Ellen Partridge, the inn's proprietor, had personally locked every door and bolted every shutter. The inn's only guest that night was a Mr. Victor Sloane, an American antiquarian claiming to study folklore relics of rural England. He had arrived that morning with a battered trunk, a pile of books on witchcraft, and the manners of a man too polite to be trusted. By 10, he'd retired to his room, No. 6 on the upper landing, after requesting that no one disturb him until breakfast. At midnight, however, the inn's quiet was broken by an unearthly cry. The maid, Lucy, rushing upstairs, found the corridor empty except for the faint smell of brimstone. When she reached room 6, she found it locked from within. She knocked, then pounded, then fetched Miss Partridge. No answer came. Within 10 minutes, the village constable, Sergeant Wales, had arrived. Before 2 witnesses, he forced the door. The scene inside froze them all. Mr. Sloane lay sprawled near the writing desk, his face contorted in horror. His neck bore the marks of strangulation, deep, purple furrows as if made by invisible hands. The single window was bolted tight, the chimney too narrow for escape. The door lock was intact, the key still inside. On the floor beside him was a half-burned scrap of paper, showing only the words, "The Halloween guest will come at midnight." Explanation. By dawn, the village was feverish with superstition. Someone swore they'd seen a cloaked figure in the fog. Another claimed the church clock had chimed 13. Sergeant Wales wired Scotland Yard, and Superintendent Hadley came down by noon, bringing with him, reluctantly and inevitably, Dr. Gideon Fell. The following afternoon, in the smoking room of the inn, I had my first sight of the great man. Dr. Fell looked like a seated fortress, vast, jovial, bespectacled, and leaning heavily on his cane. He greeted the anxious Miss Partridge with a booming laugh that rattled the china. "My dear madam," he wheezed, "don't be alarmed by appearances. The devil seldom bothers with signed notes. When one finds such neat handwriting from hell, it's usually the work of a human clerk." Hadley, all sharp lines and clipped tones, rolled his eyes. "If you've finished sermonizing, Fell, perhaps we could start with facts. A locked room, a dead man, no weapon, no prints. That's all we have. And a note," I ventured timidly. "I, Arthur Henshaw, a journalist and sometime chronicler of Hadley's investigations, a note warning of a visitor at midnight." Fell turned his gaze upon me, mildly amused, yet penetrating. Yes, the Halloween guest. Delightful phrasing. But let's not leap at ghosts before we've examined carpenters. He hauled himself upright, cane thudding like a gavel. "Come along, gentlemen. Let's see where impossibility has been staged this time." Room 6 lay at the corridor's end, beneath a sloping beam ceiling that smelled faintly of dust and lavender polish. The lock was an old brass mortise type. Fell examined it, muttering like a contented bear. Key inside, excellent. Bolts shot, window fastened, chimney sealed with old mortar. "Ah, splendid. I do adore a tidy paradox." He shuffled about the chamber, inspecting every inch. He paused at the hearth, at the window ledge, and then peculiarly at a cracked porcelain wash basin where a trickle of water had dried into faint mineral lines. His eyes twinkled. "Hadley, my dear fellow, you see before you a tableau designed not merely to mystify, but to perform. This is theatre, not accident." Hadley grunted. "Then where's the stage trap?" "Patience. Even murderers deserve curtain time," He bent over the desk. The half-burned paper fragment lay preserved under glass. Fell read it aloud in a mock-grave tone. "The Halloween guest will come at midnight." My word. How the devil did they expect him to get in? Outside, the wind began to rise, sighing around the eaves like a chorus of unseen spectators. Later, in the inn's parlor, Fell demanded ale and an armchair large enough to support his bulk. Hadley, pacing before the fire, summarized the evidence. No entry or exit, no weapon. The victim alone for 2 hours. The villagers say he was dabbling in black magic. Fell chuckled into his pint. Oh, Hadley, if sorcery were half as reliable as human folly, the police would be unemployed. Tell me, was there ash on the carpet? None, Hadley said curtly. Just that scrap of paper. Then it wasn't burned here. Interesting. He sipped again, eyes distant. You know, in the 17th century, there was a pamphlet printed in Norwich describing a spectre at Candleford, a spirit who entered locked rooms without opening doors. The trick, as it turned out, was not supernatural at all, but concerned a chimney draught and a piece of wire. I blinked. You mean this could be mechanical? Fell smiled beatifically. My dear Henshaw, everything impossible is mechanical until you learn the trick. He leaned forward, the firelight gleaming on his spectacles. This case has a flavor, yes, a very particular flavor. The key turned in the lock, the window barred, and yet the killer went in and out, like smoke. You'll find, before we're through, that our Halloween guest was neither spirit nor phantom, but an excellent stage magician who made one fatal misstep. He tapped his cane twice upon the floorboards. And that, he murmured, is where the whole illusion will fall apart. The next morning brought a damp, colorless dawn over Mapledon, the fog clinging like cobwebs against the panes of the Maple Inn. In the taproom below, the smell of roasted coffee mixed uneasily with the sharp tang of polish and the faint chill that still seemed to seep from the staircase above. I found Dr. Fell already awake and surprisingly cheerful, puffing on his pipe and studying a small metal object that glinted on the table before him, a key, dull and crooked at its tip. Superintendent Hadley stood nearby, arms crossed, his expression caught somewhere between irritation and admiration. Found it under the carpet beside the door, Hadley said, his voice crisp. Same room, room 6. It had been kicked half an inch beneath the skirting. Fell nodded thoughtfully. Excellent. Our first ghost turns into a locksmith already. Tell me, Hadley, was the key inside the lock when you arrived last night? Yes, and it fit the door perfectly. Wales swears it hadn't been touched. This one's identical, another key to the same room. 2 keys to 1 door. Fell mused. That's a redundancy rare in architecture, but common in deceit. He turned the key over in his pudgy fingers, the smoke from his pipe drifting like faint specters above the table. Observe the bend near the teeth. That tells us it was forced, possibly used in haste. Someone wanted to make certain the door appeared locked when, in fact, it was not. Hadley frowned. Then how did the door hold shut? The bolt was thrown. Quite so, Fell said cheerfully. A bolt that can be thrown by what, or by whom, is the question. Sometimes, my dear Hadley, it isn't the door that deceives but the room itself. He looked up at me then, eyes bright with mischief. Come, Henshaw. Let us walk again to room 6 before breakfast dulls the mind. We ascended the narrow staircase. The corridor was silent except for the creak of our shoes on the boards. The air still carried the faint scent of sulphur that Lucy, the maid, swore hadn't been there before the crime. Fell sniffed the air and smiled faintly. Sulphur, or perhaps a matchbox frightened open by accident. Inside room 6, the body had been removed, leaving only a chalk outline and the desk scattered with papers. Fell lumbered about the chamber, peering closely at corners, touching surfaces, his cane tapping the boards in gentle rhythm. Notice the draft, he said suddenly. Do you feel it? just here between the wainscot and the fireplace. I knelt where he pointed, and indeed, a faint current of cool air touched my cheek. It must be from the chimney, I suggested. So the obvious guess goes, and yet the flue is sealed, remember? Therefore, the air must find another route, which tells us that this old inn has more cavities than its builder intended. Hadley joined us, scanning the wall. Hidden passage. Fell chuckled, the sound like a slow thunder. No, nothing so romantic. Merely the ordinary dishonesty of carpentry. Old houses are as deceitful as their owners. He moved to the window next, his cane tracing the line of the latch. You see this bar, Hadley? It's painted over, thickly. It hasn't been moved for months. Whoever staged this scene wanted us to believe the window could not open at all. Hadley grunted. Then it was forced open earlier, before the murder, and repainted to look sealed. Or painted afterwards, Fell said, eyes glimmering behind his spectacles. But that would mean someone was very busy indeed while a man lay strangled 10 feet away. A silence followed, heavy and uncomfortable. The sunlight creeping through the curtains painted pale bars across the floorboards, like a quiet accusation. Just then the maid Lucy appeared at the door, pale and breathless. "Beg pardon, sir," she stammered. "It's the trunk, sir, the gentleman's trunk from America. It's gone." Hadley spun. "Gone?" "Yes, sir. I swear it was in the storage room last night. This morning, it's vanished. Only the dust where it stood." Fell rose, his expression suddenly very grave. "Ah," he murmured. "Now the magician begins his second act." He turned to Hadley. "The murderer may have left no prints, no weapon, and no sign of entry, but they've forgotten one universal law of trickery." "And what's that?" I asked, heart thudding. "That every illusion leaves residue," Fell said softly. "Some scrap, some sound, some foolish oversight by which truth pokes through the curtain. The trunk, my friends, will tell us what the door and the key will not." He strode toward the staircase, cane thumping like a metronome. "We shall find it," he said over his shoulder. "And when we do, we'll also find the hand that painted this ghost into existence." The three of us followed Lucy down the narrow hall, her shoes clicking nervously on the boards. She led us to a small storeroom at the end of the passage. Little more than a cupboard filled with broom handles, cracked china, and the sour scent of old soap. Dust motes swirled in the cold light filtering through the single window. "There, sir," she said, pointing to a rectangular patch on the floor where the grime was lighter. "It was right there last night, big brown thing, with brass corners. I helped Mr. Sloane carry it in myself." Hadley crouched, running a finger over the outline. "No marks of dragging. Not even a scrape. Which means," said Fell behind him, his voice booming gently, "that it didn't leave by ordinary means. Either someone lifted it bodily, and I defy even Hadley's constables to do so without leaving scuffs, or it never truly rested here in the way we imagine." He puffed on his pipe and looked about the room with the patient amusement of a cat at a mouse hole. "Tell me, Lucy, did you notice anything odd about the trunk when it arrived?" She thought hard. "Only that it rattled, sir, like there was metal inside, or glass. Mr. Sloane wouldn't let anyone open it. Said it was full of research equipment." "Equipment," Fell repeated softly. "A comfortable word that covers everything from a microscope to a murder." Hadley scowled. "If the thing's missing, someone carried it off. The inn's got 1 door and 2 windows on the ground floor. We can check who was about." "Indeed you can," Fell said mildly, "though I suspect the culprit left us something far more valuable than footprints." He tapped his cane against the skirting board beneath the missing trunk's mark. The sound rang hollow, faintly resonant. Then, with surprising agility, the doctor knelt, prying gently at the edge of the wood. A small panel lifted free with a soft creak, revealing a cavity no larger than a wine crate. Inside lay a tangle of wires, a burnt battery, and a small iron lever bent at its hinge. "Good Lord," I murmured. "What on earth?" "A simple trick," Fell said, eyes gleaming, the old theatrical kind. "A bit of electrical ingenuity masquerading as the supernatural." He looked up at Hadley. "You see, my dear fellow, the missing trunk likely held the rest of this apparatus' power cells, perhaps a timing device. I shouldn't be surprised if it was designed to operate from within the victim's room." Hadley's expression hardened. "Then Sloane built it himself?" Fell shook his head. "Hardly. This wiring is clumsy, the soldering amateurish. Our antiquarian could quote witchcraft, but not wire voltage." Rose, brushing dust from his knees. "Find who handled that trunk last, and we'll find who staged the miracle. Someone here, perhaps even our charming hostess, knows where it's gone." As we followed him back toward the hall, the wind moaned faintly outside, and I could not help but feel that the house itself was breathing, waiting, watching for us to lift the next panel of its deceit. The day had worn into a wet, uneasy afternoon when we gathered again in the parlor. The fire hissed and spat. Rain streaked the window glass like a fretful pulse. Miss Partridge sat rigid in her chair, twisting a handkerchief until it looked ready to tear. Fell, immense and placid, occupied the armchair opposite, pipe in one hand and his cane resting across his knees. Superintendent Hadley stood by the mantel, the very picture of irritation. "You understand, madam," Hadley was saying, "that a trunk cannot simply evaporate. Someone must have taken it from this inn, and someone must have helped them do it." Miss Partridge's lips trembled. "I swear, Superintendent, I don't know how. None of the doors were unlocked. No guest entered or left. I sleep just behind the front desk. I'd have heard the hinges creak." Fell gave a great wheezing chuckle that filled the room like organ music. "Ah, hinges, my dear lady, are wonderful liars. They creak when they wish to be noticed, and remain silent when well-oiled, particularly when bribed with candle grease." He leaned forward suddenly, his eyes bright behind his spectacles. "Tell me, did Mr. Sloane receive any visitors during his stay? Letters, parcels, deliveries of any sort?" "Only one," she said after a pause. "A telegram. Came that afternoon. I put it on his desk myself." Hadley straightened. "You saw it?" "I did, sir, though only the envelope. It bore the initials E.W. in pencil on the back." "That's all." Fell's pipe paused midway to his lips. "E.W., he repeated, softly. "Curious." He turned to me. "Henshaw, you were with us when we examined the contents of the victim's desk. Did you notice any trace of that telegram?" I shook my head. "Nothing at all. Only that burned scrap of paper." "Precisely," Fell said. "And the absence of the telegram tells us two things. One, that someone had reason to remove it. And two, that it wasn't mere correspondence but instruction." Hadley frowned. "Instruction for what?" "For the trick," Fell said quietly, "or for the performance which went dreadfully wrong." He heaved himself up from the chair, the cane clattering as he moved toward the window. The rain had thickened, blurring the fields beyond into a silvery wash. "I'll wager our missing trunk and our missing telegram are companions. Find one, and you'll have the other. Then we start with the village," Hadley said briskly. "Someone must have seen that trunk moved." Fell nodded, though his expression remained oddly distant. "Quite right. Quite right. But let's not forget, if a conjurer wishes to make a box vanish, he does not carry it away in daylight. He distracts the audience with thunder and fog." He turned from the window and looked squarely at Miss Partridge. "Tell me, madam, where were you precisely when the cry was heard from room 6? She hesitated, color draining from her face. Why, downstairs in my office, counting the till. I never went up." Fell's tone softened, but the twinkle in his eye did not. "Then, my dear lady, It appears someone else in this house was playing ghost between the chimes of 11 and 12, and perhaps they never left it at all. That evening, the wind rose again, sweeping the rain into hard slants against the panes and filling the old timbers of the inn with uneasy creaks. The villagers had withdrawn behind bolted shutters. Only the lamps of the Maple Inn still glowed through the gloom, casting an amber square upon the soaked cobbles. Within, Superintendent Hadley had gathered the household, the maid, Lucy, the stable boy Tom, and Miss Partridge herself before the parlor fire for questioning. I sat near the window, notebook open, while Dr. Fell loomed beside the hearth, pipe unlit, his eyes fixed on each speaker in turn with the grave patience of a hanging judge. "Start with the times," Hadley said sharply. "Lucy, when did you last see the victim alive?" "Just after 10, sir," she replied nervously. "He'd gone upstairs with his books. I asked if he needed more coal, and he said no." Hadley nodded. "And Tom, you were outside tending the stable then?" "Yes, sir," the boy stammered. "The American gentleman was at the window. I saw his lamp through the curtain. It went dark, about 11. Miss Partridge clasped her hands. "That would be right. I locked the front door at 10:30. No one came or went after that." Hadley turned toward Fell. "There's your timetable, though it gets us no nearer to how a man can be strangled in a room locked from the inside." Fell gave a rumbling chuckle. "Oh, it gets us much nearer than you think. For if we know when, we begin to see who could pretend to be elsewhere." He gestured toward the maid. "Lucy, my dear, you said you heard a cry at midnight?" "Yes, sir. A dreadful one, like a man choking." "Yet no one else heard it?" "No, sir. Miss Partridge was in her office, and Tom was asleep in the stable loft." Fell nodded slowly. "Then the cry itself is suspicious. A single ear claims to hear it, and that ear belongs to one with access to every room in the house." Lucy blanched, her eyes widening. "You think I?" Fell raised a hand kindly. "No accusations yet, child, but one must remember that in trickery, sound is as false as sight. A phonograph, a recording device, or even a mechanism triggered by a timer could reproduce a cry." Hadley's eyebrows lifted. "You believe the sound was faked?" "Quite possibly. Our friend Sloane's mysterious equipment might have been capable of such things. A man of superstition who dabbles in the mechanical is a dangerous blend. But if he didn't build the machine, someone else did." The thunder growled outside, as though to punctuate the remark. Fell's massive form turned toward the window, the lamplight gleaming off his spectacles. "Hadley, we must find that trunk before the night's out. Whoever removed it risked more than discovery, they risked exposure of the trick itself." He turned back, his voice suddenly sharp with command. "Search the stable, the cellar, the attic, anywhere dust gathers and eyes seldom look. Our Halloween guest is still here, gentlemen, though perhaps now he hides not in flesh, but in the clever apparatus of his own deceit." The search began with the sort of tense, wordless efficiency that comes only when every creak of floorboard feels like a whisper from the dead. Hadley took the stable with Tom, while Fell and I descended to the cellar with 2 oil lamps, the air thick with damp and the smell of old cider. Beneath the inn, the walls were rough stone, sweating moisture that made the flame dance. A row of empty casks lined one side, their iron hoops rusted thin. Fell's cane tapped ahead of him, steady and rhythmic, until it struck something that gave off a hollow note. He stopped. "There," he said softly, "behind those barrels." I moved one aside, grunting against its weight. Beyond, a narrow alcove appeared, just enough space to conceal something broad and low. The lamp's light fell across a shape draped in burlap. When we pulled the cloth free, the missing trunk sat there, streaked with mud and faint soot, its brass corners blackened. Hadley's voice echoed from above. "You've found it, then?" Fell gave a pleased grunt. "Indeed we have, my good man. And it seems our ghost has been rather careless with his props." Hadley and Tom clattered down the stairs, the superintendent already drawing his notebook. "Right, let's have a look." Fell leaned close to the trunk. The lock was broken clean through. Someone had pried it with brute force. Inside lay a curious assortment tangled wires, a small glass diaphragm, bits of brass tubing, and a portable phonograph half melted by fire. A charred reel of wire spooled within it, smelling faintly of ozone. "Good Lord," I whispered. It was a recording device. Fell's eyes gleamed. "And look, these tubes here, Hadley, are pneumatic, not electric. Someone engineered an apparatus to release a mechanical hand, perhaps with wire tension. The simplest trick of all, make the dead man seem strangled by invisible force, while the murderer watches from the hall." Hadley stared. "You mean the door was never locked?" "Oh, it was," Fell said, "but not as we think. Picture this. The killer fixes a secondary key, our bent one, on a length of string through the keyhole. After the deed, he withdraws it, turns the lock from the outside, and hides his contrivance under the floorboards. All perfectly theatrical." The superintendent's jaw tightened. Then this was no crime of passion. It was staged. "Precisely," Fell murmured, puffing his pipe alight again. "And who stages but one who wishes to frighten? Our Halloween guest is not a visitor from the grave, but a living mind who wanted us to believe in one." Hadley straightened, his coat brushing the damp wall. "Then we're down to the inn's own staff. Someone who could slip into that room unnoticed, plant a mechanism, and vanish before midnight." Fell's gaze turned upward toward the ceiling beams. "A staff member or someone pretending to be one? Tell me, Hadley. Have you checked the register again? Does every name there belong to a soul accounted for?" There was a long silence. Then Hadley swore, softly. "No," he said. "Blast it, no. There was a second signature in the book last night, someone named Edgar White. He never claimed a room." Fell's smile widened, slow and dangerous. "E.W., my dear Hadley. The initials on the telegram." The doctor's laughter rolled through the cellar like thunder in a vault. "I rather think," he said, "we're about to meet our ghost after all, only this one still has a pulse." By dawn, the rain had eased, leaving the air washed clean and bitterly cold. A pale sun crept through the thinning mist, silvering the roofs of Mapledon. In the parlor of the Maple Inn, a low fire burned once more, though it gave little warmth. Superintendent Hadley stood by the desk, the guest register open before him. His finger rested on the second signature firmly written in dark ink. Edgar White. No address. No departure noted. "Whoever he was," Hadley muttered. "He came just before the murder and vanished the moment after. The staff swear they never saw him." "Which means," Fell said from his chair, puffing his pipe like a contented volcano, "that they saw him constantly, only under another name." He turned his bulk slightly, looking toward the doorway, where Lucy lingered, wringing her apron. "My dear girl," he said, almost gently, "you mentioned that Mr. Sloane's lamp went out about 11, yet you heard his cry at midnight. In that hour, who entered the upper corridor?" "No one, sir," she whispered. "At least, not from the stairs. But I did hear a step above me, like someone crossing the loft." Hadley's eyes narrowed. "The attic?" Lucy nodded, trembling. "It's just a crawl space under the roof, sir. We use it for storing linen." Fell's cane struck the floor sharply. "Excellent. Hadley, fetch a ladder. I fancy we've ignored our ghost's dressing room long enough." The attic entrance was little more than a square hatch above the landing. When it opened, a gust of cold air descended, smelling of dust and wood rot. Fell, wheezing but determined, insisted on being first. His round figure somehow managed the climb, the boards groaning under him. I followed with the lamp, its flicker throwing grotesque shadows across the beams. The space was cramped, lined with old trunks and mildewed sheets. But near the center, something glinted metal, dull and narrow. Fell crouched, brushing aside a torn cloth to reveal a length of wire leading to a small pulley fixed over the floorboards. "Ah," he murmured. the magician's invisible thread. He tugged it gently, and somewhere below came the faint click of a bolt. This, Hadley, was how our friend locked the door after leaving. The wire ran through a ceiling crack, over this pulley, down to the inside of the lock. Once withdrawn, the bolt fell neatly into place, giving the perfect illusion of a room sealed from within. Hadley grunted, half admiring, half furious. Clever devil, so he could have stood here, listening while the mechanism did the work. Fell nodded, and when the staged cry sounded by phonograph, he slipped down the servant's stair, unseen. A conjurer's timing, Hadley, perfect in its absurdity. Then Fell's lamp found something else, a small case tucked behind a beam. Inside lay false whiskers, a cap, and a folded telegram marked E. W. Fell's face broke into a wide, satisfied grin. "Our visitor's costume," he said softly, "and his signature on the world's shortest engagement. Edgar White, if that was his name, didn't vanish, my friends. He merely took off his face. The discovery in the attic changed everything. The pieces, once scattered and mocking, began to arrange themselves with grim clarity. We carried the small case down into the parlor, laying it open upon the table beneath the yellow light of the lamp. The false whiskers, the cap, the telegram, all lay there, harmless in appearance, yet heavy with deceit. Miss Partridge stared at them as though they might leap up and accuse her. Doctor Fell sank into his chair with a slow, satisfied sigh, pipe clamped between his teeth, eyes twinkling with both amusement and pity. "There," he said softly, "is our phantom. Flesh, bone and hair, by courtesy of a theatrical supplier." Hadley folded his arms, his voice sharp. So this Edgar White disguised himself, used the attic for his little performance, murdered Sloane, and fled. But why? What connects them? Fell tapped the edge of the telegram with one stubby finger. "Let's see what our dead man was told." He unfolded the paper, the creases brittle with damp. The message read, "Demonstration must occur tonight. Use device exactly at midnight. No witnesses." It was signed E.W. The superintendent's eyes darkened. So the victim wasn't expecting danger, he was following orders. "Exactly," Fell said. "Sloane was no summoner of devils, Hadley. He was a showman of a sort, dabbling in folklore, yes, but always with a public eye. He corresponded with a partner who promised him notoriety. Only the partner had a different publicity in mind. Death, made to look like witchcraft." Miss Partridge gasped softly. "But who could plan such horror?" Fell turned to her, his voice suddenly grave. "Someone who understood fear its market value. This Edgar White was no random stranger. He was Sloane's former assistant in America, dismissed for fraud. He must have followed his employer here, bringing the apparatus, intending to stage one last miracle that would ruin him. The signature in your register was bait for any who'd come after. But, alas, the trick backfired." Hadley frowned. "You think he didn't mean to kill him?" Fell shook his head. "Not at first. He planned a spectacle, perhaps to scare Sloane, perhaps to expose him as a charlatan. But the mechanical hand strangled harder than he expected, and the man died before he could stop it. The rest was frantic improvisation, the burning of papers, the painting of the window latch, the faked note. Then he hid his disguise and waited until the household slept before slipping out." The room fell silent, except for the steady hiss of the fire. The maid Lucy crossed herself. "So, the Halloween guest was never real?" Fell smiled faintly, puffing smoke like a conjurer releasing a final illusion. "Oh, he was real enough, my dear, only his magic was of wire and brass, not brimstone." Hadley closed the case, his voice dry. "We'll have the ports and trains watched. If Edgar White's still in England, we'll have him." Fell nodded, his eyes distant. "Do. But mark this, Hadley. A man who lives by illusions always ends by believing one. Our Mr. White may yet find that the ghosts he invented have better memories than men. 2 days later, the storm had passed, and the countryside lay washed clean beneath a hard blue sky. The Maple Inn, once choked with fear and gossip, was quiet again, its windows open, its corridors aired, and its guests departed. Only Dr. Fell, Superintendent Hadley, and I remained, awaiting word from the yard. The Morning Post arrived with a sealed envelope bearing the Scotland Yard crest. Hadley tore it open and scanned the brief telegram, his expression tightening. "Liverpool," he said. A man answering to Edgar White boarded a steamer under the name of Edward Wayne. He was recognized by a constable at the docks, but before they could reach him, he jumped into the water. The tide carried him off. "They've not recovered a body." Fell exhaled through his nose, his round face heavy with thought. The oldest curtain call of all exit pursued by conscience. How very theatrical. He set down his ale and looked into the fire. "We may never drag him up, Hadley, but we've unmasked the trick. That's the true business of detection." I leaned forward. "But, sir, how did you know it was him? The attic, the wire, the disguise, it all fit." "Yes, but the certainty?" Fell's eyes twinkled behind the smoke. "Certainty, my dear Henshaw, is the child of proportion. I simply asked what purpose the scene served. When an impossible crime looks designed for an audience, it is the stage manager you must question, not the props. A locked door that draws attention to itself, a note that speaks too clearly of doom. These are not traces of panic, but of direction. The murderer was producing a show." Hadley snorted, "and his finale drowned him." "Indeed," Fell replied. "Every conjurer's trick, if mishandled, turns inward." He built the illusion of death and stepped straight into it. Miss Partridge entered then with a tray of breakfast, moving quietly, her eyes still shadowed by the ordeal. "Will they ever find him, Doctor?" "Fell?" she asked. He smiled kindly. "Perhaps, though I fancy he's found his own abyss. You see, madam, the sea is a perfect accomplice. It hides both guilt and repentance under the same grey veil." She shivered and set down the tray. "I've locked room 6 for good," she whispered. "No one will sleep there again." Fell raised a hand. "On the contrary, madam. Keep it open. Let it be filled with life again. That is the only way to exorcise a lie." "Outside," a gull cried above the bright roofs. Hadley gathered his papers, preparing to leave, but Fell still gazed into the hearth, his tone turning reflective. "It's always the same, Hadley. The world clamors for miracles and devils, yet it is merely man who provides both, one through ingenuity, the other through folly." He chuckled softly, rising with the help of his cane. "Well, my friends, Halloween is over. But beware, there is always another fool ready to call his ghost back from the wings." And as we left the inn, the wind carried faintly across the square, whispering like applause from an unseen audience. That night, as we prepared to leave Mapledon behind, I found myself unable to sleep. The events of the past days still clung to the air like the lingering scent of smoke after a fire. Downstairs, the inn was quiet. Only the ticking of the grandfather clock and the soft crackle of the dying hearth broke the stillness. I descended the staircase, intending to sit a while before dawn. To my mild surprise, I found Dr. Gideon Fell already there, seated in his great armchair with a half-empty glass of ale beside him, the firelight dancing upon his spectacles. "Ah, Henshaw," he said without looking up. "You've the same disease as every chronicler of crime, insomnia brought on by unfinished sentences." I smiled faintly and took a chair across from him. "Perhaps so. It feels unfinished, doesn't it? Edgar White, dead or not, the thing still seems to hang in the air. The Halloween guest, it's as though the story refuses to die." Fell chuckled, a deep rolling sound like distant thunder. "Oh, it will die soon enough. My dear fellow, impossibilities are fragile things. Once explained, they crumble into dust. But we humans, sentimental creatures that we are, like to leave a few ghosts standing for company." He leaned forward, his eyes gleaming behind the reflection of the flames. Do you recall the first question I asked at the scene? Henshaw, not who, not how, but why anyone would build an illusion so elaborate. There lies the moral heart of every so-called miracle. The locked door, the vanishing trunk, the cry in the dark, they were not devices of concealment, but of confession. White wanted to prove that men still believed in fear, and he succeeded, for a while. I hesitated. You almost sound sorry for him. Fell's pipe smoldered as he puffed thoughtfully. In a way, yes. His kind are half artist, half lunatic, those who stage death as theatre and mistake the applause of terror for truth. You see, Henshaw, murderers, rarely set out to kill. They set out to demonstrate. The killing is merely the last experiment. The old clock chimed 4, its tones echoing softly through the empty house. The doctor heaved himself to his feet, leaning heavily on his cane. Well, that is enough sermonizing. The coach leaves at 7, and I intend to meet it fortified with breakfast. You, I suspect, will want to write down every word of this nonsense before daylight spoils it. He turned toward the doorway, but paused. The fire's glow flickered across his round face, softening its lines. There's an old superstition, my boy, he said quietly. They say the dead revisit on All Hallows not because they seek vengeance, but because they wish to remind us that fear is of our own making, and in that they are wiser than we. With that, he tipped his hat, his cane tapping in slow rhythm as he vanished into the corridor. I sat alone before the fire, listening to the embers crackle and fade, thinking how right he was for outside. Though Halloween had passed, the night still felt as if something unseen was smiling in the dark. Morning broke pale and clear, the kind of morning that feels like an apology after a storm. Mapledon looked almost innocent again under the soft veil of mist that rose from the meadows. Yet, to me, every shuttered window and cobbled street seemed to hold its breath, as though remembering the performance that had played out behind its doors. Fell emerged from his room shortly after 6, wrapped in his heavy cloak, the silver head of his cane gleaming like frost. He greeted me with a jovial nod and a wheeze of satisfaction that always preceded his finest moods. Well, Henshaw, the world spins on, he said, adjusting his scarf. Murders solved, ghosts debunked, and I, for one, am in desperate need of a hearty breakfast. In the dining room, Miss Partridge had laid out eggs, bacon, and a pot of coffee strong enough to raise the dead, an irony not lost on any of us. She moved with subdued grace, the shadows still present under her eyes. "You'll be leaving today, Doctor?" she asked. "Indeed," Fell replied. "The yard will tidy up the rest. But take comfort, my dear lady. Your inn will be famous now not for horror, but for hosting one of England's rare honest mysteries." She managed a wan smile. "Fame wasn't what I'd hoped for, sir. Few who find it ever do," Fell murmured kindly, raising his cup. Hadley arrived soon after, brisk as ever, his coat collar turned up against the chill. "Word from Liverpool," he announced. "Still no body. They've dragged the docks twice. Either White's gone down for good, or he's slipped the noose entirely." Fell's pipe emitted a slow curl of smoke. "If he lives, Hadley, he'll live badly. A man who thrives on illusion cannot bear daylight for long. Sooner or later, he'll try his trick again, and next time, he'll fail. I'll wager you're right. Still, I'll sleep easier once he's in a cell." The carriage arrived not long after, wheels crunching on the gravel outside. We stood together at the threshold as the morning sun began to break through the mist, turning it to threads of gold. Miss Partridge clasped her hands before her. "You've given us peace, Dr. Fell," she said softly. "Even if it came at a cost." "Peace," Fell said, "always comes at a cost, but fear charges interest." He climbed into the carriage, his bulk settling with a contented sigh. The cane laid across his knees like a scepter. Hadley joined him, and I followed. Glancing once more at the inn, its crooked chimneys, its shining windows, its deceptive calm, As we rolled away through the village, Fell looked out at the receding rooftops. "You know, Henshaw," he said, "there's something fitting in it all. Halloween began as a night to honor the dead and ended here as a lesson for the living." I closed my notebook on the final page. "And what lesson is that, Doctor?" He smiled, the ghost of laughter in his eyes. "That the dead seldom haunt us, my boy. It's the living who refuse to stay buried." The train steamed northward through a quilt of mist and fields, its rhythmic clatter a kind of punctuation to the silence that had settled between us. Dr. Fell sat opposite me, half hidden behind the morning newspaper, his round face occasionally flickering into view as smoke from his pipe coiled lazily against the window. Superintendent Hadley had dozed off beside him. Hat tipped forward, the faint rumble of his breathing blending with the wheel's steady song. I, meanwhile, was trying to order the events of those strange days into something resembling sense. Fell lowered the paper suddenly and fixed me with an amused eye. "You're writing the ending already, aren't you, Henshaw? Don't pretend otherwise." I smiled, caught in the act. "It's true, but I'm not sure what the ending really is. The man we sought is gone, perhaps drowned. The inn is quiet again. Yet something still feels unfinished." "Ah," Fell said softly, "because the real endings, my dear fellow, are never written in reports. They happen here." He tapped his temple. "And here." He laid a thick hand over his chest. "Every mystery, once solved, leaves behind a ghost of its own. The mind demands closure, but the heart refuses to be so tidy." Outside, the countryside blurred into shades of autumn bare, hedgerows, distant church spires, and the occasional scarecrow like a sentinel over the empty fields. Fell continued, his voice mellow as the train's hum. "You see, the tragedy of Edgar White wasn't that he killed a man, it was that he mistook fear for power. When you build a lie grand enough, you start believing it yourself. He thought he could control illusion. But illusion, Henshaw, is a treacherous servant. It always demands payment." I nodded, scribbling the words in my notebook. "Then you think he didn't mean to die?" Fell gave one of his great, wheezing chuckles. "Meaning rarely enters into the matter. The stage was set, the curtain drawn, and the actor forgot his exit. That's all. It happens more often than you'd think." Hadley stirred and muttered something about nightmares before settling again. Fell looked down at him fondly. "He's the sensible one of us, you know. He believes the world is made of doors that stay locked or open by honest keys. But the rest of us, we keep peering through keyholes and finding mirrors." The train slowed for the first stop, a lonely country platform where fog drifted like smoke over the sleepers. Fell rose with surprising agility for his bulk, gathering his hat and cane. "This is my stop, Henshaw. There's an antiquarian in Oxford who owes me a luncheon and a debt of argument." He paused before stepping down. "Write your story as you will, but remember, the impossible always begins as a mistake someone refuses to admit. That's the seed of every good mystery." He winked, descended onto the platform, and vanished into the fog, his laughter echoing faintly as the train pulled away. And I sat there watching the mist close behind him, wondering not for the first time whether Dr. Gideon Fell solved impossibilities or simply walked among them.